we go. Now, most importantly, I'm very pleased to introduce Dr. Rachel Taylor. I think some of you joined us for the event in December, and we're very pleased to have her with us again tonight. So Dr. Rachel is a neuroscientist, but tries to make a kind of neuroscience accessible, I think is probably the best way of putting it, and usable. And I found your last event so interesting. So I'm going to hand over to Dr. Rachel. If anyone has any questions throughout, either put them in the chat. If you want to ask them secretly or privately, you can directly message me and I can field the question for you anonymously. Or if you want to ask them, put them in the chat, or you can unmute yourself and ask questions. We're quite a big group tonight, so it might be better to put them in the chat actually whilst the session's going. And then at the end, we can do more of a kind of conversational Q&A. But without further ado, over to you, Dr. Rachel.
So thank you, Emily, and thank you everybody for welcoming me back again. I was just saying to Emily, I said it was a good sign last time that we went over and people didn't mind. So I just got very involved in answering the questions. So I think this is a really good follow-up to the last session that we did. And I think understanding how trauma manifests and how it actually translates to memories, because no matter what kind of grief or loss you have had, as discussed last time, the brain and the body, the nervous system treat it all as trauma. And I think people forget that actually it's a very traumatic event. And even when you are expecting a death, when it actually happens, the trauma that the brain feels is quite a selfish one. And this comes from an unconscious part, so it's nothing to do with you as people. But for the new people who have not a chance to see the last one, it actually is the brain thing wanting you to take notice so the same thing doesn't happen to you. So so this is the next step, and sort of thinking about how can we understand the traumas and how can we understand the trauma memories a little bit better. So the insights that we're going to do today, we're going to cover the brain structures and functions that are affected by grief and loss. So the parts of the brain directly around the memories and the trauma memories. We're going to learn how the emotional world sort of supports the bereavement process, which is fascinating to me, because it's not all about sadness and grief. You know, there's quite a mixed bunch of sort of emotions going there. And I often get sort of questions asked for me when people think that they get hysterical laughter at a really inappropriate time. You know, things like funerals or when people are actually dying, and what does that mean? You know, and I explain how it's literally a coping strategy, a subconscious one. And then we're going to finally cover, you know, how to remember the good memories when still affected by trauma. And, you know, I'm going to give you a little bit of a strategy for that. And I know we're going to have questions here now, but if anything comes up in the future, please do email Emily or email myself, but you can email Emily and Emily can get in contact with me. And I'm quite happy to answer anything, because I know that we cover a lot of ground, we cover a lot of information, and sometimes that can take a little bit of time to sort of settle in, and it's only maybe 2 weeks, 2 months, a year later that you might think, oh, what does that mean? So please do get in contact with Emily or myself, and I'm quite happy to answer questions going forward. So I wanted to start off just with the model of how the brain stores memories. So we're going to start off with sort of the long-term memories. So these are the general the memories that we're dealing with when we're dealing with grief and loss, because these are the memories that are imprinted within our brain, and imprinted in particular within our limbic system. So for those of you who were here last time, we spent quite a lot of time, and I was telling you all about the amygdala, the 2 almond shapes, you know, and here you get so, you know, sort of almond shaped structures within the brain, which literally process all the emotion and keep us alert for anything that can happen. And then we have sort of all the memories that are kept within the hippocampus, and we imprint all of our memories with emotion. So we have all these sort of functions and structures within the brain, where we contain all our long-term memories. And the reason why I'm telling you about this now is that because this is the specific part of the brain that is going to affect you the most when you are suffering grief and when you are actually sort of within the whole loss process. And you will find that there will be triggers sort of going on all around you, anything that you get through your senses, which can remind you or literally give you some recall of the person that you have lost, or something that is associated with them without you even knowing that memory is going to be triggered. You might not even notice, you know, what is going on around you in your environment, but your eyes will and your brain will, and you will respond even before you realize that. So in talking about sort of long-term memory, when you are grieving, when you have lost someone, the long-term memory takes over. And when I show you sort of the next slide, which is where the working memory is and the short-term memory, this is the part of memory that we have within the prefrontal cortex. Now, for most people who are grieving and who have lost, you know, and it doesn't matter if it's immediate loss or if the loss has been 12 months ago, if you are still feeling the effects of loss, you will have problems with your short-term memory. You will have problems with going through probably everybody's name before you get to the right one, remembering what you have done sort of 5 minutes ago, even forgetting if you've asked a question and got an answer to it. And this is because when somebody is grieving, when someone is feeling that traumatized because of death, there is not enough energy to sort of keep the prefrontal cortex working, and all the energy is going back to here where the long-term memory are stored. It's all about the emotions. It's all about remembering the person, remembering how you felt about them, remembering who they were, remembering what they do, all of these things. So the reason I'm sort of laboring this point is that most people think that they can actually be going or are suffering from some sort of mental health problem when you know, somebody's like, so I can't remember anything, I can't remember anything in the short term. And that's because the brain is designed for that particular function to not be able to have enough energy, because all the energy is going into the limbic system, so that you can remember everything about the person who has passed. And it doesn't matter what your relationship with them, whether you love them, whether they will love your life, whether it was a close parent, whether it was somebody you hated and you think, why am I so upset? You know, it doesn't really matter. What matters is that the brain actually registers there's been a loss, and the brain then will divert all of its energy from the prefrontal cortex into the limbic system and sort of where the long-term memory stores are. You know, so in a nutshell, that is sort of the neurological explanation of sort of the short-term and long-term memory stores here. In practice, what this actually means is that people can become trapped within the long-term memory. And I know that when I've had a conversation sort of with Emily, when we were discussing what might be interesting for people to listen to and talking on here, she said in her experience, a lot of people who sort of seek help is because they are sort of stuck in that long-term memory loop and find it really difficult to move on from it, and find it really difficult to access sort of this working memory, short-term memory sort of memory model. So everything feels stuck in the past because that's where all the memories are coming from, and there's not that ability to move on. So what I wanted to do was to sort of discuss and talk about the different kind of trauma memories that people could be suffering from, and sort of suggesting alongside that maybe some interesting remedies, things that people can do to try and get beyond those. And if at any one time people want to jump in to sort of ask questions about this, please do feel free to put it in the chat, because I realize you know, that as we're talking about things, it can trigger things for you, and you might want to ask questions about it. So please feel free to do that while we're going through the sort of the different trauma memories. And I think it's really important to remember as well that you might recognize and sort of associate with all of them, or you might just associate with one of them. It doesn't mean that there is something wrong with your brain. It doesn't mean say that you are ill, or you are broken, or you are not able to cope with grief and loss as much as the next person. It just means that your brain deals with things in an individual way to everybody else. So some get stuck in the passing and long-term memory, and because it's about the energy available and the strong connection between the prefrontal cortex and the limbic system. And this is really important because this is just a generalization of society as we are living now. There is a real danger that people haven't got a strong enough connection between the prefrontal cortex and the limbic system, because everything around us is actually telling us not to think, just to feel. So we are being encouraged to sort of live with our emotion all the time, and not just about sort of personal individual issues, but when you work advertising, marketing, programming, lots of articles written in newspapers and magazines, they're all geared up to trigger your emotional center, to make you do something, make you buy something, make you think you need something. So if somebody hasn't got a strong enough connection with the prefrontal cortex and the limbic system, it's really difficult for them to get past sort of the long-term memory issues and start recovering in a different way. And when somebody is in that pattern, and somebody says, the worst thing that somebody can say to them is like, well, you should just be able to move on, as if that was simple, as if that was the easiest thing, when really what we need to be encouraging people to do is to strengthen that connection between the two parts of the brain. And this is nothing to do with any kind of talking therapy or any kind of medication. Often there's really simple exercises which we can do. Like, for example, if you go for a walk 3 times a week for 40 minutes and think about something else while you are walking, that will strengthen the connection between your prefrontal cortex and your limbic system. And that's a really gentle way of doing it. You know, so we need to sort of say to people that the environment that we live in is not great for supporting people who have, you know, got stuck in that loop. And we need to be supporting them to be able to understand their brain and move on from it. And instead, what we tend to do is sort of compare and think, well, why have they not got over the grief as quick as that person? What's wrong with them? There must have been something else going on. And because that is the general sort of conversation that we have, you know, and I'm just thinking something really recent is that I got asked to read Prince Harry's book, which was going to stay away with it. I was not going to go near it with a barge pole because I didn't want to get part of the media circus. But one of the things, he's deeply in grief still. After all these years, he is still grieving a lot, and he's being judged for that grief. And I think we're not good. We're sort of thinking, well, people should be able to get over this in 5 minutes. You're allowed to have the funeral. Then maybe you're allowed to have a month or so. Then really you should be moving on for it. And that is not how the brain and nervous system work. So, you know, other things that you can do when you're stuck in grief, it's about getting the brain to do 2 things at once. Okay, so we want to get the prefrontal cortex, so that's basically our thinking brain. So we want to slow things down. So something that another thing to do is to listen to music while you're writing at the same time. You know, that's another really gentle, kind way. You need to be doing something cognitively, so you're thinking at the same time as doing something else. because we need to strengthen that. What we're going to deal with flashbacks, we're going to talk about that in the trauma memories. Don't worry, Charlie. Sarah, sorry. Don't worry, Sarah. We're going to cover that in the later slides. So I'll move on, because I can already feel that we're going to be going over again. So I'll move on to the next slide.
Just a quick question.
Yeah.
A quick question was so Kristen says, why do some people get stuck in the past in long-term memory and some do not?
Right, so I thought I just answered that question. Because their limbic system is too disconnected from their prefrontal cortex. So when that happens, it's difficult for them to be able to use the ability to have that short-term memory, because literally all the energy is concentrated on this sort of the emotional center. And basically what the brain is trying to do, it's trying to warn somebody to be aware of not letting that happen to them. So it will be continually stuck in this loop. So yeah, and you know, like I say, if it be interesting to people, I have quite a lot. I'll say this. I've got some exercises that might be good for people to have who are stuck, who want to have a really gentle way, because I would imagine that the majority of you can get pretty sick of trying to get some help, you know, because it's like you're trying to treat this as a mental health problem, and it's not. It's a functional brain problem when you're stuck in this kind of loop. So if I will provide, I will send to Emily like maybe 4 or 5 different kind ways where you can strengthen the connection between the prefrontal cortex and the limbic system that can help you move on from being stuck in that. So yeah, I will provide that for Emily. So yeah. So let's move on to sort of the different kinds of trauma memories. So we have the involuntary recall, you know, and this is like, this is when you don't want to remember something, when it literally just comes at you. You might even be trying to forget something. And this happens because of the way that sort of the traumatic episodes has been encoded and stored. So every memory is encoded within the hippocampus. You know, look at me, I'm just pointing to the side, you know, to the part of the brain where your head is, where it's there. So every memory is encoded. It doesn't just get encoded with the basic facts, because the brain likes saving energy. So it will encode it through senses. It will encode it through certain sights, certain sounds, certain tastes, certain smells, and also it will imprint it with an emotion. So you could hear a certain song and it bring up that memory. You could walk past a building and you see somebody who's dressed in a similar shirt to and it will bring up a memory. And this is how it's encoded. And you will get sort of, you know, these intrusive involuntary recall where you deliberately are trying not to think of something, but you will get this, you know, and this is a real part of sort of the trauma memories. The only way you can change this is by changing how that memory has been encoded in your hippocampus. So you're going to have to take that memory and think of different emotions to lay over it. Think about how you want to remember it, what you want the meaning to be. And quite a lot of people, you know, it's not really a done thing to try and change the meaning of memories. It's not something that people do. So we're going to sort of cover a technique right at the end, which will help with this. But it's really important to remember that none of these memories and the way that they come up are to do with anything other than how your brain functions. It's not because there's something wrong with you. It's not because you're ill. It's not because you're not a strong person. It's because of how your brain is structured, and in particular, how your environment is around you. So when we're talking about sort of these kind of trauma memories, it's, you know, really important that you remember that this is your brain responding. This is not you as a personality responding. And I can say that, you know, with complete precision, because the part of your brain that is responding to all this is the part of the brain that works so quickly that there is no grown-up conscious thinking going on before it happens. You know, so the only way we can alter this is when you are ready to go into these memories, is that you can go through a thinking process to take control and start to overlay some of these memories. And like I said, again, we'll come to this at the end, but I just wanted to sort of sort of reiterate, because I have worked with a lot of people who have dealt with loss, and one of the overwhelming things is, why am I not dealing with this well? And it's just like, well, to a large extent, it's not really your fault. And most people don't know how they're going to deal with death and loss until it actually happens to them. It's not something that we generally plan for. We don't have lessons in death and loss ever. And it's like one of the most fundamental things in life. And we don't have lessons in how to deal with it. You know, there's no, I suppose, it'd be akin to a parenting class, wouldn't it? And it's just like, we have nothing in sort of Western society that helps us to deal with any of that. So when it does happen in our circle, of external circle, we are so impacted by it because we really have not planned how our brain and our body is going to respond to it. So if anything else, it's almost like we need to start a support group, not just for people who are suffering loss, but for anybody who's interested in what happens when loss happens, because it's such a huge thing. I've got two close people to me at the minute who are waiting for people to die, and they're quite blasé about it, and I'm trying to prepare them, like, even when the death happens, you are going to be so traumatized by it because it's such a shock, even when you're waiting for it. And they don't believe me because this is something that is never talked about. It's never ever talked about. We need to get better. So we also have the nowness. Yeah, I'll compile a list, Sarah. So yeah, because of mine, the interesting thing, Sarah, is that there's not that many, on minding grief. There's a load of like social science, where sort of behaviors, but there's not that many on sort of the brain and nervous system. So neurodivergent brains, really interesting, is that they tend to view loss as if they could personally have prevented it. That it's something to do, because I think I spoke to you last time about this sort of atypical brains being, my favorite kind of brain, and in utter awe of how amazing I think brains in general are amazing, but neurodivergent, how sort of localized that they are and how energetic they are in those areas. So, but generally the emotional thing, because the amygdala is atypical, it's like there is too much emotion for that person to deal with. So yeah, and what would happen then is that there would be a sense of self-responsibility, that there must have been something that they could have done to stop it, or there must be something that they can do to help everybody else in the process. It's almost like, what role can I take? I need to take the role of the person who sorts everything out. So yeah, the neurodivergent brain, it is really interesting because the amygdala is it's already quite sensitive to what is going on in the general world. So sort of the nowness of the traumatic memories, it's a sense that it's happening in the here and now. And it's like there's never an escape for it. It exists, that sort of that it happened in the past, but your body and your nervous system is behaving as if it's happening in the now. It's especially observed with in children. Children tend to sort of get trapped in the now with it, but it also can happen with people who are diagnosed with PTSD. And to a certain extent, when somebody has experienced, death, and then they've not been prepared for it, and it has been a massive shock to them, I maintain that people who suffer from any kind of need to be treated as, as if they have got PTSD. They need to be treated because the body responds differently, the brain responds differently, memories get encoded differently. Trauma affects the brain in such a huge way. It affects personality, it affects the ability to relate to other people, it affects the ability to risk assess. There's not many sort of brain functions that are not affected by trauma. And if we treated everybody with the kindness that is needed when somebody has PTSD, then the impact on the brain and the body is not going to be as long as if we just pretend that that's not happening. You know, and treating PTSD doesn't have to be medicalized. It doesn't have to be sort of allopathic medicine. It can literally just be by recognizing that somebody has experienced trauma and putting things in place so that the environment is supportive and nurturing and kind, and that person feels safe in it. You know, and this is something that I'm, you know, part of what I try to do in my work, you know, is like, why do I want to do this? I want to tell people so that we can create a kinder world, and it's a better world for people to live in, you know, because then we can all thrive and then we can do really well. And it's about being kind. And when we're dealing with, you know, things that happen in life, and we know through sort of extensive research that the death of somebody, the loss of somebody, has such an impact, you know, that it affects cardiovascular function, it affects respiratory rate, and this can be, you know, quite impactful. It's not something that people recover from in a couple of months, depending on how deep that trauma is within a person. It can last for years, and that's going to has a massive effect on the physical and mental health of someone. This is why it's so important to sort of understand some of this and you know, get the support to be able to sort of accept that this is what you are going through, and then sort of get coping strategies to help you move beyond it. So we have sort of the predominance of sensory representations, and this is when you get a memory and your whole body and the senses are so aware of that. And this can be anything from sort of you know, thinking that you are imagining somebody, and somebody who has died, they're there in the room, you're imagining them to you know, they're speaking to you. You know, you can even experience the pain that you felt when that person passed on, or the hopelessness, or the sense of helplessness, you know, anything like that. So the trauma of the actual death itself, or the build up to the death, or the aftermath of the death, you know, anything like that, you are going to revisit it, and you're going to be feeling everything as if you were still there. You know, and this is a really common one for people who have, you know, sort of have witnessed deaths that have not been peaceful, or have, you know, have been quite violent in the passing, or quite painful in the passing, is that the brain will encode that memory. And again, it's, you know, quite a selfish survival thing, that basically the brain wants you to remember so that you can avoid that happening to you. And then you get all sorts of secondary emotions attached to that, sort of the shame and guilt, because, you know, I shouldn't be feeling like that, I shouldn't be thinking like that. But that is how the brain is structured. That's how, you know, it's a survival evolutionary benefit, you know, sadly, in that we are going to remember things that remind us of mortality, so that we can avoid them going forward, which is really useful in sort of, you know, 250,000 years ago, where we might need to know not to walk somewhere because of the cliff that we can fall off. But in modern times, it can seem quite impersonal and quite selfish for our brains to work like that. But our brains have not evolved that much in the 250,000 years since, you know, Homo sapiens became the dominant species of human beings. So we're going to have to sort of work with that and understand that, and understand that's why we are responding the way we are doing, that's why we're getting the memories we are, and it's just basically to keep us safe, so that the same thing doesn't happen to us, what has happened to the person that we are grieving. So fragmentation. this will happen more frequently than people understand, and this can be particularly distressing because it's when people can't remember everything. They can't remember specifics of memories. They can't remember you know, even things like they can't remember what somebody smelled like or what somebody's favorite food was. And it's the fragmentation of it just basically is because the brain is under so much stress, it cannot retrieve all of the information. And sometimes it will do that as well to conserve energy, because there's so much energy going into other functions. And in particular, when people you know, are dealing with sort of the death in the initial aftermath, aftermath of it, it's like there's so many things that are vying for attention that the brain has to make a decision about what gets attention, what gets energy, and what doesn't. And generally, memory, apart from survival memory, memory per se is something that's not important to have. So we will not generally get memories if the brain doesn't think it's useful for us to remember that. And this is what happens with sort of fragmentation. And sometimes we never get all the memories back, and that can be quite distressing for people. And sometimes it takes some time, and sometimes we have to just sort of accept that and just sit with it and calm ourselves down. And it's almost like, you know, going back to the sensory stuff, if we can get something, an object, or go somewhere where we're actually going to try and access some of the senses that can trigger these memories. So we can do things to sort of help with that fragmentation of it. And, you know, as I've said, if we were kinder and treated people who, you know, are going through sort of the loss process in a bit of more of a supportive way, then the brain itself of that individual would not be struggling as much. And this is something that we all have to remember, because I know that a lot of people, oh, you'll be supporting other people, supporting family members, you might be supporting children. And it's really important to ensure that everybody is getting an adequate level of support. There's not like a take one for the team when it does with death and loss. It's not as simple as that. It's that we have to ensure that we're all getting the same sort of adequate support levels, that we're all getting enough energy, that we're looking after our well-being at a time when it might seem the most ridiculous time to think, have I drank enough, have a water, that is, you know, have I eaten enough, if I can't sleep, am I at least getting adequate rest, or am I running around after everybody else? It can seem the most unnatural thing, but the more that we can sort of support ourselves and nurture ourselves and look after ourselves at a really traumatic time, the better we can be at managing some of these trauma memories. So, and this is the thing I'm going to be talking about, sort of, you know, daytime and nighttime. Yeah, and I completely understand, and it should be, and it's like we are so bad at loss and grief in this country. I don't know anywhere in the Western world which is really good with it, you know. And I'm not entirely convinced that our Eastern brethren have got it right either. It's like it's such a taboo subject, and there's a lot of it where it's nothing to do with the person. So talking therapies are not going to help, because you can talk as much as you like, but if you don't understand that your brain's not working because it's not got enough energy, and it's actually saving the energy, so you're not going to be able to think properly. You're not going to be able to do that until, you know, that part of the energy is sort of sufficient for it. And unless you know how the nervous system works and sort of sensory stuff, you're not going to understand sort of how somewhere you go can trigger you massively, where and other days you're just fine. It's almost like, well, what's wrong with me? I can do this okay, but I can't do that okay. So, you know, I completely agree that things need to be better, but I also think there's so much stigma and taboo attached to it. And, you know, we're meant to just get on with things, aren't we? but sometimes we can't just get on with things because our brain is not letting us do that, because it's like, have you noticed what can happen to you? That might happen to you. And if we're not taking notice of that, it's going to keep shouting louder and louder and louder until we stop and acknowledge, yeah, okay, I've seen that could happen to me. I'm going to look after myself. I'm going to keep myself safe. And if you can communicate that to your brain by your actions, then your brain's going to be a lot kinder to you. We tend to sort of not think of ourselves as, you know, and like, that's not really a good conversation to be like, you know, meeting someone. So do you ever think about your brain structures and how they affect your everyday living? It's not generally a conversation topic we have, but you know, especially when we're talking about things like grief, it's like, how are my brain structures going to be affected? And I was really concerned during the pandemic, and you know, honestly, my utmost condolences to any of you who lost people during the pandemic. That was the most inhumane way of dealing with people I have ever witnessed as a neuropsychologist. And you can see I'm getting quite upset about it myself, because no one should have had to deal with death like you had to do during the pandemic. Because anybody who has any kind of knowledge of the brain and the nervous system and humanity, just as humanity, would know that the impact is going to be so huge. Oh, Colette, you know, my heart is going out to you. When I used to see how people being, I'm just like, what are they doing? This is madness. This is complete madness. And what that did, Colette, to you, your brain will have shifted in structure more than somebody who was burying somebody in 2019. And we have to accept that. It's not nice. It's a really inconvenient truth. But anybody who lost somebody from 2020 until sort of, what was it, April last year, sort of the restrictions came, anybody who lost people then, your brain is going to be a little bit different in structure than even people who lost people before, or even your brain's going to shift it, but those people especially, your brain structure is going to be severely affected by what you went through. And you will definitely have PTSD from what you had to deal with, definitely. And I bet nobody's actually treated you for that. So you really need to nurture yourselves, love yourselves, and just understand that there's nothing wrong with you. You lost people and had to deal with that loss at possibly one of the most inhumane times that we have ever had, you know. So, and if there's anything that I can do to support you or point you in the direction, you know, please get in touch with me, because this is something I feel very angry about. I don't know if you can notice, this is something I feel very angry about, you know, that yes, we, you know, can completely understand that people didn't want to, you know, put people at risk, but there's risk management, and there's just being downright cruel. And I thought a lot of the policies around death were very cruel. So if I can help anybody, then please do let me know. But this is something, you know, that sort of your brain structures will have changed, and they can change back. Don't worry, this is not doom and gloom. We have a very plastic brain, but we have to do things very slowly to be kind to our brain and recognize that it's going to take time to get over something like that. So yeah, it's going to take more time to get over something like that. But the brain is very plastic, and if you do the things that are nurturing and supportive, then your brain can actually, you know, recover and be how you want it to be. So some of you will have extremely vivid memories, and some of you won't. When we get memories that are trauma memories, it's like you can think, it's like you're almost there. You can transport yourself back. You can describe what colour the carpet was. You can describe if there was a wrinkle in the curtain. You can describe if you heard somebody whistling going past the window. They are so vivid for you. And when you are immersed in those memories, everything else disappears. It's like your whole being has taken over. You know, and this is the really important thing here, is that when we get these kind of sort of vivid trauma memories is that they fail to incorporate any kind of new information, you know, and this is what's really important, is that you're literally stuck in that memory. And as try as you might, you cannot get away from that. And these are the sort of memories that can paralyze us. And there's part of us that don't want to let go of that memory, because what does that mean? It means, you know, we don't want to let go of how we were feeling, or we don't want to stop thinking about that. And there's part of us that wants to move on and wants to forget it because it's so damaging for us. And we have to sort of, and again, it's, you know, it's kindness in the truest definition. And kindness to me, for those of you who were here last time you heard me speak about this, but if you are new to listening to me, kindness is about meeting a need with a long-term strategy. And as much as there is probably, you know, sort of all the need to remember the person that you have lost, there is also a need that you do not become damaged in the long term, either with physical health or mental health, because you are stuck in this memory. So a kindness is meeting that need with a long-term strategy and not a short-term gain. So it's about, okay, I'm stuck in this memory. What do I need to be able to just very gently start incorporating new information on this? And that's sort of to calm yourself down and take some of the trauma out of it and say, yeah, this has happened. You know, what do I need to be able to feel safe to move on, so that this memory is no longer so vivid for me? And it's doing it in that very kind, inquisitive, inquiring way. And often, if we just ask ourselves, what do I need, we'll get a very true answer back. We'll get an honest one. And it might be something really weird, and you'll think, God, what's that mean? So yeah, what do I need? I need some green vegetables. You know, and also it could be something as bizarre as that. Or what do I need? I really need a hug. I really need somebody. I need a grown-up to tell me that it's all going to be okay. That's what and the need will be completely individual to you. And don't dismiss that first thing that comes in your head, because that's often the very thing that you do need. Because like some people say to me, apparently I need green apples. I went, well, there must be something in, you know, there must be something in that. And they went, no, I don't need green apples. And I went, go with the first thing. Go with the first thing, and in a week or so, let's see how you feel after you've been having the green apples. Because sometimes these things don't make sense, but it doesn't need to make sense. It needs to help us. You know, that's all it needs. And sometimes things are never going to make sense. Never, ever. You know, there's so much chaos. And I sit down, and it's an indulgence for me. I sit down and for 10 minutes and think, God, why is all this chaos being caused? And it's my torture tool for 10 minutes every day. You know, some things don't make sense. But if we ask ourselves what we need and we start to respond to that, that does start making sense in the long term. So it might not make sense in the short term, but if you listen to yourself over the long term and provide what you need, that can make all the difference for you. So, you know, high levels of emotion, like, so trauma memories are often accompanied by massive levels of emotion. You know, for some people, they get no emotion, but that doesn't mean to say there is none. It's like, literally, we can't let this out the box. You know, we keep it up. But for most people, trauma memories, like, it's like very high levels of emotion. They're very energy heavy, and they're also quite tiring. And it's like you feeling an emotion, but you can also, you're having the emotional effect, and you're not even realizing why you're having it. You've not got the memory with it. It's just like, why am I suddenly hysterical with tears? Why am I suddenly sort of overwhelmed with this massive wave of sadness or hopelessness or helplessness? You know, all of these things. And it's because you are experiencing an effect without actually having that physical memory. So it's not that you have a dysregulated emotional world. You know, most people are like, oh God, you're out of control. There's something wrong with you. Yeah. often when we are feeling, when we know that we've had sort of that traumatic event and we are feeling such high levels of emotion, it's not that we're dysregulated in terms of, oh, I can never manage my emotion. It's that you are actually being assailed with that emotion without actually having the sort of the mental capacity to have that memory, you know. So and I'm sort of saying this, it's not a get out of jail free card, you know, if you like literally start throwing things around the house or you know, that kind of thing. Although that, you know, that does have its place at times as you're deliberately thinking about it. You know, this is sort of so you can understand that when you get hit with that sort of wave of emotion and thinking, what is this about? That the explanation might just be that you've had that memory that's just come that you're not even aware of, that actually is filling you full of that emotion. You know, and again, this is something that is not talked about much. And certainly if people go and try to get some kind of support with this just from a general GP, I would sort of say 9 times out of 10 you'll get some sort of pill to help manage these emotions. And sometimes you just need somebody to say, you experience an emotion attached to a memory that your brain just doesn't have capacity to tell you what you're remembering. And if you track it back, there'll be some sort of trigger for it. And I will say this for emotions, as hard as they are to feel, emotions are always better out than in, you know, and sometimes we just have to accept that we need to feel something and let it out, and just, you know, have this explanation that it was a memory that we can't remember, rather than thinking there's something wrong with me, I need to have something to do my regulation, because obviously I can't regulate myself. And unless you are fully certain that you have processed all your grief and you have processed all the trauma, then please don't be so unkind to yourselves.
Are you ready to go upstairs with me? Come on.
All right, let's just check this question. Yeah, the issue is that your short-term memory is not working. So for that person on the app, and this goes back to that, or you will not be able to hold focus, you'll not be able to hold attention, because literally all the energy is being sort of focused on there. The interesting thing here is you will probably be more aware of emotions in the room rather than be able to hold a conversation. So if I was to ask you, well, all right, you're not going to be able to hold a conversation, but can you tell me how people were feeling? I bet you could tell me how everybody in that room was feeling. Even though you couldn't remember if they'd asked you a question or if you've answered a question. So it goes right back to the start of this session, where I was talking about sort of the short-term versus long-term memory. And if you have real problems with not being able to do that, and you know, so, and this is for people, so maybe I would say that you to consider it an issue, I would say that the loss has to be more than 12 months ago. I think that if it's still within that 12-month window, then you're quite all right having short-term memory, working memory issues, as long as it's not all the time. And it will just be with some things. Because I think if you're having a conversation with someone and you're doing that, so it's not just about talking to somebody, you will be observing the body language, you'll be seeing all the micro expressions on the face, you'll be processing their pheromones, you'll be watching the environment around. So there's a lot going on. So you will still be aware of some things. And I would say give yourself at least 12 months for everything to settle down before you start thinking, oh, there's something, you know, not quite right. Then start doing sort of some of the exercises to strengthen the connection between the prefrontal cortex. So yeah, Charlotte, it can literally, you know, and anybody who has sort of got diagnosed PTSD, memory issues when you're in times of stress and tiredness are always going to be an issue, because the brain does not have enough energy to deal with everything. So, and that's something to sort of remember, that the baseline. And the way I look at it, you know, because I am also somebody who does have complex PTSD, is that we live in a really bad environment. That's not very nurturing for anybody. So there's going to be certain times where you have to look after yourself a bit more and just accept that, you know, you're going to have the short-term memory issues. You're going to go through like 50 names before you get to the right one. And if you're anything like me, ask your children the same 4 questions and forget both the answer and the fact that you've asked the question. You know, it's sort of an acceptance of fact with that. But the kinder we are and the more that we support ourselves, the less the sort of the PTSD affects our nervous system and our energy levels. So often people find that they have memory issues because it's been a particularly busy time or a particularly stressful time or a particularly tiring time. You know, so we have to just sort of look after ourselves a little bit more with that. So these are really common, sort of the old re-experiences during the day. You can have it both during the day, or, you know, if you're having it during the night, these, you know, be in the form of nightmares, or sort of the semi-awake ones when you're aware of things in the room, that kind of thing, or you're aware of noises outside of yourself. You know, and these can be particularly distressing. Because we're actually reliving the memory, and you'll be having the physiology of it, you'll be having you know, the whole awareness of what's going on. And again, these are things that can only be sort of remedied over time and by sort of processing some of the memories and looking after ourselves better. And this is the one thing that, you know, it's like, you know, I just laugh when people talk about resilience. They talk about it all wrong. From a neurobiological perspective, resilience is the ability to have plasticity in the brain, so like sort of broaden your mind, have a really strong social support network, so you have belonging, and having the right kind of meaning attached to your memories. Resilience is sort of bandied about this country as if it's like a race to the bottom and the ability to bounce back after adversity, and it's just like, no, that's not really resilience. You know, life should not be all about adversity. We should have other good things that actually are protective factors against bad things happening. Death and loss and grief, you know, are part of life, and we should have the protective factors of a really strong social support, being able to have understanding about our brain, and then having capacity to place new meaning on memories that we want. We don't have that. I'm not a fan of EMDR, I'm afraid, because I think that can, if you don't have a really good practitioner, that can cause more harm than good. I love hypnosis, especially for people who are struggling to relax. Hypnosis can be really helpful in learning how to sort of just relax your nervous system. And I tell you what I really like as well to help with PTSD, yoga nidra. Now, you may fall asleep, which is like ironic because it's meant to be non-sleep deep rest. So I challenge you not to fall asleep in the middle of it, especially when you're going down a rotation of consciousness. You know, I always fall asleep like 10 minutes in. I fall asleep. So yeah, it's like something I really recommend yoga nidra over any kind of mental health sort of practice. I think yoga nidra should literally be one of the, you know, I was like, you know, because like the cost of living, I was thinking, you know, for any of you who've been under mental health services and having like a crisis, you'll have rang up and they'll say, oh, have a bath. You know, like, what do they tell people to do now? Because they should tell people to do yoga nidra. You know, that it's far better than having a bath. I always think it's quite patronizing. I'll go and have a bath, you know, as if that's going to help when you're going through your sort of your crisis. You know, I understand why they do it, but yeah, yoga nidra is so good for helping with trauma. It's so good for connecting with the body, and it can be so good sort of just for processing things and just creating a little bit of distance. So yeah, I definitely recommend that. And EMDR, I struggle to think of anybody that I would recommend sort of, and I'm not saying that there's not anybody who is a good practitioner, but I have worked with a lot of people trying to undo the damage done by the EMDR, if that makes sense. So yeah, so I can't really recommend. If I ever come across anybody who is really good, I'll be sure to let Emily know. But I've not met anybody in my travels or in any of the work that I've done. So I wanted to just sort of touch on the theory of a trauma memory, because I think it might help you to understand how we can sort of unravel it all in the process that I'm going to share with you. It's like, it's all around that the trauma memory is processed in the same way as a normal memory, which that makes sense, because they've not found any kind of, even any kind of, oh, this could be different, as in function in the brain. So a trauma memory is sort of encoded at the same time in the same place, and it's stored in the same place as a coherent memory. So like a memory where you remember, oh, this is where I put my washing powder, this is where I put my jumpers, this is where I take my child to school. So that kind of sort of memory. So trauma memories are doing that. But during the heightened emotion of it, the part of the brain which processes the memory, it does not operate as effectively as it does. So it's sort of, the encoding is done, but then it's not stored as like a normal memory. So like, it's almost like you don't need to have, it's like, oh, where's that jumper? Oh, I need to feel anger before I know where that jumper is. So with trauma memories, you're always going to have a heightened emotion to deal with that memory. So you're not going to get a memory of your loss or a memory of your loved one that is going to be without some sort of heightened emotion. You're not going to just get it and it's just going to be, oh, I remember, that's where dad sat, or that's where my brother used to go play football, or that's what mum used to love doing. She used to love baking a cake every Saturday. You're not going to get any of those memories without the heightened emotion that goes with it. And that's because, as I explained before, that all sort of grief and loss is a trauma to the individual. And the trauma intensity sort of increases or decreasing according to how that person figured in that individual's life. So I remember speaking to a lot of journalists when the Queen died, and saying, why are some people so upset by it? I said, well, they're either projecting grief that they've not been able to sort of get out for their own, or the Queen was a massive influence in their life, and it's as simple as that. Personally, I got wound up by the queue. Like, why were people queuing when you could get a number? So you could just go when you're there. But people respond because of how people who they've lost sort of show up in their life, or if they've got any regrets, or if there's anything been unsaid, if there's any kind of emotions that are like literally lingering, that can heighten sort of a trauma memory as well. There's very few deaths where people are actually celebrating the life that somebody has led. Very few, where it's literally, that this person had an amazing life, I'm quite sad that they've gone, but I'm going to really celebrate, they lived to a good age, they had a good death, we're accepting of that, and life goes on. There's very few people who have a life where that actually is a normal progression of things, because we don't live in that kind of world, we don't live in that kind of environment. We actually live in an environment which is very stressful and has quite a lot of anxiety and fear overlaid on it. So I wanted to put that sort of the theory in, so you can sort of understand where this is. And you all, I would imagine, have seen the stages of grief. The Kubler-Ross is normally that, yeah. The thing is, from a neuroscientific approach, it's not that easy. It's literally like this. It's like everything all over the place, nothing makes sense. You can revisit things numerous times. You think you're over it, and then you're not over it. And the thing is, with this sort of emotional world, and particularly in grief and loss, is that there's no way, there's no one way. It's entirely, from an individual perspective. It's like, what have you experienced? What have your influences been? What was your relationship with that person? There's no linear progression through grief and loss, and there isn't for anybody. You know, so the person who literally comes to terms with death in 4 weeks, it's not that they're better than the person who's still grieving 20 years later. It's just basically we all have different influences. We all have different belief systems. We all have, to a certain extent, an individual sort of mechanisms within the brain. We all have different levels of support. So we cannot say, well, this is a pathway to deal with grief and loss. What we can do, and I'm intending that, you know, part of the 2 sessions that I've done, is that by understanding how your brain is responding and your nervous system is responding, you can start to give yourself more comfort, more kindness, more support, and understand why you are responding or feeling or reacting the way that you are doing. And then you can put different strategies in place, different, you know, kindness strategies to enable you to feel more supported doing it. But I can't look at a person and say, right, you know, well, you're 6 months, you're 3 months, or you'll be 2 years before you get over it. We cannot do that. We can never do that. And we should never do that. We should never put a number on somebody's process. We should always just accept that they're done when they're done. And if they're never done, it's not a reflection on us, it's just a reflection on what that person has been through and what that person is still suffering and the pain that person is still going through. And that's what we should, that's how we should start looking at people. It's almost like I use the, you know, I love the metaphor of sort of Winnie the Pooh and all the friends. Never once do they tell Eeyore to get over it and stop being depressed. They just accept that's who he is, much the same as they accept that Tigger's annoying and bounces everywhere. You know, it's just an acceptance that this is your group. These are who the people are, and that's what we should do, particularly in something you know, as complicated as grief and loss. So this is
I feel like that is a nice point to say that we're running over by 5 minutes. I think this is super interesting.
I'm so sorry. I
know there's always so much to talk about. But I wanted to just kind of raise the flag and say we're running over. So maybe should we try and wrap up in the next 5 minutes?
Yeah,
or so?
This is the last little bit, really.
Great. I thought that was such a nice note that I was like, we could end there, but let's do the last bit then.
I'm so sorry, everybody. I really did try to keep it, but yeah. This is why whenever I speak at a conference, they give me an extra 10 minutes to everybody else, and this is why.
And just to say, Kristen, that I've actually just posted in the announcements channel with the recording of Dr. Rachel's last event, and we'll also share this one too, so you'll be able to watch it back afterwards.
So this is, I'm going to say, this is a really quick, easy, and it's not easy. It's not easy, and I'm not trying to pretend that it is easy. But what we need to do, if we want to reprint sort of a memory, so we want to move from the trauma memory into a more positive and easier to deal with memory, we have to work on 3 things. We have to work on the senses. So what is triggering that memory? What is actually working with us to make that memory comes up? What is our body? So taking note of what our physical and emotional response is. So we have to do that. We have to acknowledge, what am I feeling, both emotionally and physically? And then the final part of the puzzle is you put your own personal meaning on it. So you're not having a meaning just imposing you either by your subconscious or anything else. You put your personal meaning, and some of that personal meaning can be like over time. Like, first of all, it could start off is I'm missing whoever. That's my personal meaning, and over time you can move it into I want to celebrate who they are. I want to remember them with fondness, and that's the personal meaning that we can put on it. You know, and this is not something that's going to happen overnight. I'm sorry, I've not got the magic wand for that. But if you start working with your memories like this, over a couple of months, you can start having a more positive meaning where you are celebrating rather than being overwhelmed with sort of those emotions that make you feel stuck. So I apologize for overrunning everybody. I apologize for that. And this is just literally the final wrap up, you know, just basically be kind and ensure that your environment actually is supportive of your grieving process, and that you're not trying to have that race to the bottom, you know, as if like we're all, you know, if we can just say that we're at the bottom, we're still fighting, that makes us, you know, better. It's like, no, let's be as kind as we can and model that to everybody who is around us. So thank you, everybody. I apologize for running over again. Emily, I'm so sorry.
No, nothing to apologize for. It's always so interesting. So thank you. I feel bad stopping you.
I know,
but I know,
quite right.
I feel like this is not going to be the last of the events. I'm hoping this is not going to be the last of the events you do for us. And Dr. Rachel has really kindly created a kind of workbook, and we're setting up on Monday a group with tools and resources from our wonderful kind of experts, and we'll share those in there. So do look out for that. Just some more kind of practical tools and techniques for coping, as created by wonderful experts like Dr. Rachel Taylor. I just want to thank you so much. I feel I learn so much every time you come and we talk and you share. So really, really appreciate it. Yes, and if you have any questions, there's her email address, and you can also message me in the app if you want to be connected as well. Thanks, everyone, and see you soon.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks for being such a good group.
Bye.